In the last video, we talked, or ended with, rather, the social cost of carbon, the value that we would assign to all of the negative effects of releasing carbon into the atmosphere. And those numbers varied widely from $37 per ton all the way up to like $700+ per ton. So we need another value, and we need to set a market price for carbon. Remember, market price is the amount that needs to be paid with that supply-demand curve. So there are two main systems for this. And the first one we're going to talk about is cap and trade. And you've probably heard of it, even if you're not completely sure what it is. The country that sets up the cap and trade system will set a cap, a total amount of carbon that they think should be put out. And this is the supply, quote unquote, for this item that we're worried about, which is carbon in the atmosphere. And so they assign it, these caps based on different trades. So the one we have here is 2 power plants. So the companies that emit more than their assigned amount can buy or trade the permits that other companies have. So let's give an example. And this is what you kind of see. So like over here we have Power Company A. I'm assuming these are power companies, but I don't really know. So Power Company A has switched to a cleaner, less carbon emitting process for generating electricity, something like wind energy or maybe solar, something like that. So they now have this pink area represents how much carbon they've used, and they have all this other stuff which they can now sell, and they sell it to Company B. Company B is still possibly using say coal-fired electrical generation. And this gives off quite a bit of CO2. And they're actually giving off, if you look at the little circle, more than they're supposed to. So in order to offset that, they buy some of the unused carbon cap that Company A had. And this is the way cap and trade works. And the way for cap and trade to work well is that the caps always have to be a little less than makes the companies comfortable, but still allows them to function. And the benefit is that for A, money goes to them. And this is nice because they've just invested in whatever technology is making them cleaner, and this can help offset that. So it's a way to encourage companies to go green with a financial incentive while still allowing for other companies to catch up. So that's cap and trade. The other method is carbon tax. I don't have a lot going on here because there isn't a lot to be said for carbon tax. But the market price is set by the government. And it's set by the government based on a variety of factors, which really should include the social cost of carbon, but doesn't to a large degree. So nobody gets any freebie amounts of carbon dioxide. And the amount of CO2 that is emitted by a company is charged. They have to pay for it. So there's a tax on every ton of carbon that a company gives off. And the price is set pretty high to control demand. If it's not set high, it just becomes part of the business paradigm. We actually have this kind of going on where a little bit with the ESU, where it just becomes part of business as usual, paying all these taxes. And one of the real concerns, and I kind of left it off the slide, is that they will pass on these costs to the user, to us, which could be a little bit scary. So those are the two main systems, carbon tax and cap and trade. I don't know why this is on here. I made this slide. Worldwide, 12% of emissions are regulated by either cap and trade or carbon tax systems, but that's about to go up. 40 countries in what I read was called a subnational region, that's basically states, already have or will be implementing one of these two systems. So the idea of assigning a market price to carbon is catching on and spreading because it really puts the ball back in the court of those who are emitting more than their fair share of carbon. This is a map that has a lot going on, but it basically shows you many of the different areas that are now participating in or plan to be participating in various cap and trade. They sort of left out quite a bit of the Northeast United States, which includes like New Jersey, New York, and there's a word on here, the RGGI, right there. This includes a bunch of states in the U.S. that have decided to enter into a cap and trade. And your state, New Jersey, has elected to do so, to participate in cap and trade. So that's nice, considering we backed out of the Kyoto Protocol. Speaking of Kyoto, If you look there, that's Kyoto. Kyoto, I drew it in the wrong spot. Right there. Kyoto's an area in Japan where the protocols were held. I will talk more about that in the future. But you can see that there's lots of different ways. So this, like in the EU, they use quite a bit of carbon tax. That's in this area, all the scratchy lines. And the light green is where it's already been implemented and things like that. So there are different systems out there and people are getting ready to use them. So now that we have a market price for carbon, we should compare it to social cost of carbon. And it's lower. It's actually like a lot lower. So remember we looked at that graph before where the social cost of carbon was anywhere from $37 to $761 per ton. Most of the world, 85% of the world, has carbon price levels less than $10 a ton. And this is because the market price, the carbon price, is set by political and economic negotiation mostly. And we're getting out of my subject area and my comfort level, but to be perfectly honest, you know that there are these things called political lobbyists, and different industries have different lobbyists who work on their behalf and try to make their point that setting these carbon price levels will hurt industry for them. And they've been successful for that. I mean, ideally they would like none, but I think you can see that 10 and even the low one, the 37 in the US, there's a lot of space in between there. So carbon price levels are not at the remotely the same area as even the lowest range of the social cost of carbon. But does the price of carbon need to be the same as the social cost of carbon? And the answer is no, not necessarily. So think about this instead. So we have this high value, this social cost of carbon, and then we have this low value, which people want to pay, which would functionally be zero. But if we find the amount of money it costs to switch from a polluting activity like the coal-fired plant to a non-polluting activity like switching to solar generation of electricity, that money, the amount of money that costs is called the marginal cost of abatement. And the marginal cost of abatement is how much we need to offset in order to sort of even the playing field. And let's talk about hybrid cars for a second, because this is a classic example. The hybrid car is going to cost more money than your typical gas car. And I think you know why, but if you don't, the reason is because hybrid cars have technology that's a lot newer. We've been making gas-powered cars since the Model T Ford, even before that. And we've been making them on assembly lines and cheap and fast. And we have maximized the ability to reduce the cost of production. That's not true with hybrid cars. They're still getting new parts. They're still developing new technologies for batteries. Hybrid cars are still ramping up production, and that makes them cost more. If we assign a value to the hybrid car in some way that offsets the difference between the hybrid car and the regular car, that's the marginal cost of abatement. And you may have heard, some of you have hybrid cars, that if you buy a hybrid car, you get a big tax credit as an owner. And that tax credit is supposed to be that marginal cost of abatement. It's supposed to offset the cost that you had to shell out more for your hybrid car than you would have if you just went and bought, like a generic, like my car, like a Mazda. Okay? If your marginal cost of abatement can even that playing field, then the green options can really begin to take off. And we're seeing this now with other technologies. So there's really two types of marginal cost of abatement that we're going to talk about, at least in the scope of this class. And that's charges and taxes on polluting items. I don't think we see as many of those in the United States, but in the 1970s, during the oil crisis, which none of you are old enough to remember, and neither am I, by the way, they instituted the gas guzzler tax. And the gas guzzler tax came from what we call the C.A.F.E laws, which are the corporate average fuel economy law. And they were basically what, made people stop driving around those giant old, Cadillacs that, got 10 miles to the gallon, and forced them to get more fuel efficient cars. So if you bought a car that got less than, and I wish I remember the magic number, I think it was 12 miles to the gallon, if it got less than that, which seems crazy in this day and age, then you got a huge, hit with a penalty, a tax on that car, which made that car more expensive than its cheaper and more fuel efficient counterparts. And the idea was that it would limit the number of, these gas guzzlers driving around. And it worked. Yay. Super awesome. Yay. There was an exception to this law, and this is one of those things that drives me nuts. At the time that this was made in the 1970s, almost nobody drove what we'd call a light truck or SUV. I mean, maybe there was like a Bronco and a Wagoneer, and those were like the only two type. And so they kind of limited the car companies said, leave these guys out, they're heavy and da-da-da-da-da. And now almost 50% of us drive SUVs, myself included, the small, CUV mom SUV. But even the large ones are all exempt from this guzzler tax. So it's something that, needs to be addressed, and hopefully in your lifetime will be. I think much more common in this country is subsidies to green tech. And this happens on an industrial level. And lately there have been a lot of talk about the subsidies that are going to solar, especially since one of those big solar industries up in one particular company in New York State is not doing well. I believe they even filed for bankruptcy. But the idea was that these, solar panels are another example of a technology that, while it's been around a while, to bring it up to commercial production made it prohibitively expensive compared to regular electrical generation. So not only is there subsidies to people, if you have solar panels on your house, you probably know your parents got a tax credit, kind of like with the hybrid car, but there's also subsidies to actual energy companies that instead of building another natural gas plant or a coal-fired plant, they will get a subsidy to help offset the cost of building a solar farm or a wind farm or whatever green technology they're going to take up. So those are the two ways to deal with the marginal cost of abatement. And these work. These actually, I hope you remember, you guys are only, 17, 18, that solar panels were just not seen on people's houses when you were little. And now they're everywhere. So, it can work. This then begs a question, though. If we're collecting taxes, whether it's a direct carbon tax or we're putting taxes on polluting items like the gas guzzler tax, what do we do with the revenue? And the subsidy sort of works that way. There's actually a subsidy from our gas in New Jersey that goes directly to helping solar in New Jersey. So if you buy gas, it goes to solar. Is to offset the initial startup costs, whether that's for the individual or the corporation. And then there are other ideas about what to do with that money, like putting it in a special fund, income tax rebates. There's also a social component to what to do with this money. For those of you who have already played the game, you can see that, some people think that, that special fund might be best used to help offset the costs of those who are, say, refugees of climate change. Like we've talked about briefly, the Maldives and Tuvalu, which are countries which are likely to disappear completely to climate change. There's a question: is it fair as a globe to take some of the money that we collect regarding the pollution that we give off and give it to people who are the victims of that pollution, even if they didn't contribute to it? Not a lot of cars on these little tiny islands. So all things to think about, and that's kind of where we're going to stop with the economic part. We're going to talk about this in class, but make sure you look over the words because you're going to need to know them.